Hello, welcome to the Global Church Project. I'm Graham Hill. Adam Taylor is Executive Director of Sojourners and author of Mobilizing Hope, Faith-Inspired Activism for a Post-Civil Rights Generation. Adam Taylor previously led the Faith Initiative at the World Bank Group and served as Vice President of Advocacy at World Vision USA and the Senior Political Director of Sojourners. He's also served as the Executive Director of Global Justice, an organisation that educates and mobilises students around global human rights and economic justice. Adam Taylor is a graduate of Emory University and Harvard University Kennedy School of Government and the Samuel DeWitt Proctor School of Theology. Taylor is ordained in the American Baptist Church and serves at Alfred Street Baptist Church in Alexandria. Adam Taylor, welcome to the Global Church Project.
Thank you.
In Mobilizing Hope, you talk about mobilising and inspiring transformed nonconformists. Mm-hmm. What's a transformed nonconformist?
So I have to share his quote just to make sure I fully quote Dr. King on that one. So, a lot of people know Dr. King's speeches, and certainly I Have a Dream and others, Letter from a Birmingham Jail included. But his sermons were also quite powerful. In one of my favorite sermons by him, he did a remix of Romans and said, "The saving of our world from pending doom will come not through the complacent adjustment of a conforming majority, but through the creative maladjustment of a non-conforming minority." It's kind of a mouthful, but it's basically these two concepts and commitments of being creatively maladjusted to the world around us and to be a transformed nonconformist. And for me, what that means is following a very radical and revolutionary Savior, Jesus Christ, who it wasn't political in the way that we might understand political today, but his ministry and his message had profound political, economic, and social implications. And he pushed up against a lot of the abuse of power that he saw among religious leaders and political leaders during his time. I think there's been kind of a danger within the Christian church to either overly privatize Jesus. So Jesus is only about my personal relationship with Jesus and faith is fire insurance from hell, or to kind of sanitize Jesus and take out the kind of radical implications of what it means to follow him. And so, a transformed nonconformist is someone who recognizes that following Jesus takes some sacrifice, it takes some risk, and ultimately we have to come on the side of the marginalized and the oppressed. Jesus started his public ministry proclaiming that the Spirit of the Lord is upon me to preach the good news to the poor. So if our ministry is not good news to the poor, it's not the ministry of Jesus Christ. And that kind of has centered my understanding of what it means to be faithful.
How do you help people work through the intersection between faith and politics? It's not always easy to navigate that space. But what are some of your thoughts about the ways in which we can do that?
Yeah, I think that being engaged in politics, particularly in a democratic system like Australia and the United States, and I'm not arguing these are perfect systems, but they at least are somewhat responsive to the voices and the votes of citizens. In that kind of system, it is critical to be engaged because our non-engagement is actually a political act. So Dietrich Bonhoeffer once said that our silence is actually a political act, and our inaction is a political act. And obviously those consequences were quite dire in the context of the rise of the Third Reich in Nazi Germany. But, politics is not a spectator sport. So if Christians feel like, we can just remain pure by not getting involved, and that will prevent us from corrupting our faith by making imperfect choices and who we vote for, the consequences of that is that we are essentially then endorsing and giving license to whoever gets selected and whatever outcome happens. And so, I think it's critical that Christians see political engagement as part and parcel to discipleship, that it is an expression of our discipleship to be engaged. Now, there's lots of different ways to be engaged. I think the most obvious one is to vote. And particularly in our context, because my ancestors fought and died for the right to vote, it is absolutely essential that not just me, but everyone exercises the right to vote, right? But it's also about all the ways in which you can use your voice and your own agency to affect change. A lot of people underestimate the degree to which you writing letters to your members of parliament, in our case, members of Congress, can make a real difference. You making a phone call to their office. We're here for the voices for Justice Conference here in Australia. And you're going to have a lot of young and older Christians gathering together to unite their voices to pressure Parliament around the issue of foreign aid and to really try to reverse this trend of pretty significant cuts to Australian foreign aid. I have seen firsthand how when a kind of constituency is built around an issue like foreign aid, and this happened in the United States, that is diverse, that kind of brings together lots of different voices, when they generate a kind of wave of letters, phone calls, op-eds and newspapers, when they kind of make this a priority issue, that can transform political decisions. And in the case of aid in the United States, we were able to do that successfully first with the HIV and AIDS issue. We kind of mobilized and organized a very broad coalition that was able to put the issue of HIV and AIDS at the top of the political priority list and was able to convince President Bush to announce a major initiative called PEPFAR, the President's Emergency AIDS Plan, that literally has helped put 13 million people across Sub-Saharan Africa and the Caribbean on life-saving treatment, which is just remarkable. It's, I think, one of the greatest achievements of the Bush administration. But in the process of doing that, we were able to help members of Congress understand that not only funding HIV prevention and treatment programs, but also funding broader health programs, funding kind of broader efforts around economic development was an essential part of how the American projected its best values in the world and how we help build a healthier and more safe and more prosperous world that ultimately benefits America. So kind of made the case it's the right and moral thing to do, but it's also the smart thing to do, right? And we've been able to build up, the larger we, a very durable constituency of support that has made foreign aid kind of bipartisan cause. So even after President Trump was elected in 2016, he immediately tried to make pretty draconian cuts to foreign assistance, U.S. foreign assistance. And he was rebuffed by Congress, who basically ignored his own budget and said, no, these programs are really important. And they had the backing of a lot of religious leaders and other voices that had built up the support over time. So I'm pretty hopeful that a similar thing can happen in Australia. And I'm just using that as a concrete example of how when we engage in political change, it can really have dramatic results. And it doesn't always require engaging in protest, as much as I believe in the importance of those in many circumstances. It can involve a lot less kind of sexier things like writing letters and, again, writing op-eds and building a relationship with your member of parliament, because that stuff really matters.
What do you love the most about your ministry?
I love the fact that I get to work on issues that I feel really passionate about. I get to do that in the context of the church. I get to work with the church in the United States, but also around the world. And that I really get to help the church better understand what biblical justice means and how to live it out, and to give the church greater tools to be able to live out a greater commitment to justice. And for me, I mean, it's a blessing to be able to feel called to ministry. So I didn't share this story earlier, but I really wrestled with the call to ministry for a long time. And I kind of fought God on this because I associate ministry with only going into pastoral ministry, which obviously is a really important expression of it. But I couldn't understand why I was so passionate about politics and social justice. And I felt like I'd have to kind of leave that behind if I went into pastoral ministry. Obviously, that was a false choice because, many examples of pastors that are deeply engaged in social justice, as they should be. But what I realized is that my calling was really around about equipping and inspiring the church to engage more in justice. And Sojourners is the perfect vehicle for helping to do that. And I've been able to be a part of a number of recent social movements. I mentioned the AIDS movement, but also was really involved in the Jubilee Debt cancellation movement. I've been involved in the immigration movement in the United States. I've been involved in the kind of movement around racial justice and trying to end mass incarceration. And while not all those movements have been totally successful, we have seen some pretty significant change and victories along the way. And so that is extremely gratifying.
What gives you the most grief or frustration in this ministry?
I think a combination of the degree to which the environment, particularly in the United States, is just so polarized. Is something that just gives me a lot of anguish. And I think I thought we had made more progress as a nation when it came to kind of embracing justice and overcoming some of the demons of our past. And it feels like, some of those demons may have just been right below the surface. And again, President Trump was able to kind of appeal to some of those demons of kind of racism and fear around the other, et cetera. I also just get frustrated sometimes with the church. I love the church. It's like this tough love. But, the fact that we're still having these arguments about whether social justice or justice is a critical part of the gospel is pretty exasperating. I mean, I'll still have it. I'll still, but I mean, I don't understand how you can't read the Bible, at least if you understand the context in which the Bible was written. It was written from the underside of oppression, pretty much the entire thing. From, beginning to end, you are seeing the plight of the Israelites in the context of threats around them and an oppressive situation. The plight of the Israelites under Pharaoh is a perfect example of that. But then you get to Jesus, and Jesus is a poor Palestinian Jew living in the context of the oppressive and brutal Roman Empire that has, essentially enlisted and co-opted religious leaders to promote its own aims and ends through the Sadducees and Pharisees in particular. And, while Jesus had a spiritual revolution that was his primary objective, he also spoke directly against those systems. I mean, one example that often gets overlooked, he went into the temple, overturned the tables of the money changers, a very dramatic act. And he wasn't doing that just because religious leaders were defiling the temple with economic activity. He was doing it because they were selling doves and they were exploiting people with exorbitant interest that they were charging on loans. And was literally angry at the way in which that was abusing and exploiting people. And so that was a direct confrontation with the exploitative and oppressive economic system at that time. And so, again, I don't have to convince you, but I just feel like if we put the Bible in its proper context, and if we kind of used a hermeneutic of justice to understand the Bible, we wouldn't be having these arguments. And I'm not saying that to kind of ignore the degree to which, at the end of the day, we do need to be focused on salvation and redemption and forgiveness and all the other things that were core to who Jesus was and what he did on the cross and the power of the resurrection. But let's not ignore that he was pretty radical in his time, and he confronted a lot of the powers that were, active in his time. And his message had a real message to them, and it should have a real message to the abuse and misuse of power today.
What's most misunderstood about the things that you say?
As we've been discussing, when I talk about social justice, a lot of people just associate that with a liberal cause, particularly in the U.S. political context, or they think that we're not emphasizing enough the importance of the role of the church or of salvation as what we should be focused on. And again, I don't see these as either or. One of my favorite texts in the Old Testament is Isaiah 58, where the prophet Isaiah talks about the kind of religious worship that pleases God. And he literally goes on to say that when you feed the hungry and you break the yoke of injustice, so in other words, you address the root causes of injustice, then your light will shine like a noonday. You will be like a well-watered garden. You will be called repairs of the breach, restorers of streets of dwellings. It's really poetic and beautiful text. But what I love about that text is he directly ties religious worship that pleases God with acts of compassion and justice. And then he goes on to say, when we engage in acts of compassion and justice, then we will experience more abundant life. We will experience the kind of fulfillment and wholeness that God wants for us. So it's not about our own savior complex of just helping others. It's about our own wholeness being tied into the wholeness of others. And again, that kind of sense of interdependence is just replete across the Bible. And for me, it should just end this argument about, whether we should only be focused on evangelism, or we should be focused on justice, or we should only be focused on compassion, or whether we should focus on activism. We can chew gum and walk at the same time, and we have to understand that these things are very much intertwined.
If you could say one thing to the church today, what would it be?
It would be, let me qualify your question a little bit. To the Western church, it is time to recognize that the center of Christianity is now in the global South. And I actually think that the church by and large in the South has a lot less difficult time understanding the connection between evangelism and justice, and between compassion and justice. Not to say there aren't still some challenges there too, but I just think that their theology is informed a little bit differently, and they're not as captive to this kind of Western Christianity, which often tends to be much more individualistic. So I think there's a lot of hope in the sense that the Western church, the American church, could learn so much from the explosive growth of Christianity across sub-Saharan Africa and parts of Asia and even parts of Latin America. And I actually think that there, over time, is going to be kind of a reverse missionary movement where those Christians are going to come to the United States and be able to share a gospel that I actually think is going to be quite important and powerful. I think that the church more broadly, now is the time for the church to be the church and to live out a more holistic gospel. And it is absolutely crucial, both for helping to inspire a lot of Christians to stay in the church, because I still believe in the church, and I believe that the church is really important and necessary, but also to try to transform our politics and our economics in a way that models God's kingdom come. And again, we can have some disagreements along the way about how best to do that, but let's have that conversation, not about whether we should be engaged in justice.
Adam Taylor, thank you for joining us for the Global Church Project.
My pleasure.
The Global Church Project is located at www.theglobalchurchproject.com. On our website, you'll find a wide range of interviews and resources for colleges, universities, and churches. I look forward to your company next time. From me, goodbye.